Bailey Faye Arlene Blunt was born on March 2, 1995, and graduated from Fort Bragg High School in Fort Bragg, California. While she had struggled with substance abuse, she had sought rehab and was now moving past that part of her life. Around that same time, she met 24-year-old Tyler Thomas Burrow, who was 4 years younger than she was, and the two began dating and living together. However, the relationship was very tumultuous. 28-year-old Bailey had even confided in her mother that Tyler was always threatening to take his own life if she left him, and basically had the attitude that if he couldn't have her, no one could. Unfortunately, that mindset would lead to a horrible tragedy. After Bailey broke up with him, she began dating his friend Jordan, which only worsened the situation. Everything would come to a head on September 22, 2023, when Bailey left Jordan's house and drove her green Dodge Ram pickup truck to Tyler's house in Humboldt County, California, to pick up her things. She even told Jordan before she left to come find her if she hadn't returned by dark. At 4:38 p.m., Bailey sent a frantic text to a friend saying that Tyler was intoxicated and holding a gun on her. She sent that text to 3 people and was sadly never heard from again. When Bailey failed to show back up at Jordan's, he went looking for her and encountered Tyler on Berg Road. The two men got into a physical altercation, which ended in Tyler punching and knocking Jordan out. The following day, Tyler was seen driving Bailey's truck, but there was no sign of her or her dog Hank. 2 days after she originally went missing, he was spotted on a traffic camera 4 hours away in Central Point, Oregon, at the intersection of East Pine Street and Hammock Road near Interstate 5. Law enforcement searched the area, but was unable to find the truck, Bailey, Tyler, or her dog. Meanwhile, Bailey's family went and searched the trailer that she shared with Tyler and found her cell phone and purse still there. There was also an open can of Rockstar energy drink, and it appeared she was sitting at the table packing when someone or something interrupted her, most likely Tyler. It would be weeks before Tyler was spotted again, and this time he was in Trail, Oregon, about 35 miles north of Central Point. He had since spray-painted Bailey's truck black to evade police. Law enforcement then caught up to him in Medford, Oregon, which is back toward Central Point. However, a high-speed chase ensued when they attempted to pull him over. He was taken into custody and charged but released. He then failed to show up for his court dates, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. On November 14, 2023, he was found at a remote forest camp about 7 miles from Medford, Oregon. This time, he was riding a motorcycle with no lights or license plate. Once again, he was booked but released. When investigators questioned him, this coward refused to provide them with the location of Bailey, which they suspect will be her remains. In July of 2024, the USPA Nationwide Security got involved in the search for Bailey. Her mother has since said that she believes her daughter is dead on that mountain and refuses to give up the search for her. Bailey is described as 5 foot 5 inches, 150 pounds, with dark hair, burgundy underneath, and brown eyes. She has a sword tattooed on the back of her neck, extending vertically between the shoulder blades, and a fishhook tattooed on the lower thumb of the outer palm of her hand. Sadly, as of August 2024, she has not been found, and this case remains unsolved. Jeffrey Allen Klungness was born on December 9, 1981, to parents Susan and Ron, who both worked at Boeing until Susan retired from her computer operator job after becoming disabled due to a knee injury. In early 1996, 14-year-old Jeffrey was living with his parents in a mobile home in Bonnie Lake, Washington. He was described as a shy kid with a bit of a temper at times, but nothing out of the ordinary for a typical teenager. He was a student at a private school, making decent grades, and loved the card game Magic. He was also known for walking with a slouch and a limp. He would then strangely disappear one day. On March 2, 1996, Jeffrey's father, Ron, arrived home from work between 4 and 4:30 p.m. and found the door to the trailer unlocked and the television on, but no one was home. Since Susan's car was also gone, he assumed they had gone out for a while. Ron only made it as far as the couch and decided to take a nap. When he woke a couple of hours later, he tried to enter the bedroom, but found it blocked by something. That's when he shockingly found Susan beaten to death and quickly called 911. When investigators arrived, they determined that she was attacked while sitting in the armchair in the living room and that a trail of blood led from there to the bedroom, which means she either crawled or was dragged. It's also strange that Ron didn't notice the blood. Investigators discovered that $700 and Ron's gold watch, a Seiko quartz with a gold finish with the serial number SGF-206, were missing from the home. He received the watch on his 30th anniversary with Boeing. As for Jeffrey, he was nowhere to be found. As investigators dug into the Klungness family, they learned that Ron and Susan had been married for 15 years. While Ron's failure to notice the blood in the living room was very suspicious, he was able to prove that he was at work at the time of the murder. It was also discovered that they were letting Jeffrey hang out with a 41-year-old man by the name of Martin Malcolm, who went by Marty, who had served 12 years in prison for the murder of his estranged wife, a fact that his parents were well aware of. They met him at church 3.5 years earlier, and he had become a frequent visitor to their home. However, he quickly wore out his welcome because he was spending too much time there and was borrowing their cars and never filling them back up with gas. The following day, at 4 a.m., Susan's maroon 1991 Toyota Camry station wagon was found abandoned at a convenience store in Auburn, Washington. Marty then turned himself in that same day. He said that he showed up at the mobile home and found Susan's body, but panicked and took her car. He also admitted to taking $300 from her bank account and spending it at the Muckleshoot Casino. For stealing the car and money, he was sentenced to 45 days in jail. He then lawyered up and refused to cooperate in Susan and Jeffrey's cases. Investigators learned that Marty took Jeffrey to get a haircut at 11:30 a.m. on the day he disappeared. He was then seen driving up to an ATM in Susan's car, but there was no sign of Jeffrey. He returned to their home at 12:30 p.m. and then claimed he left again to run an errand. He said he returned at 2 p.m. and that's when he found Susan's body, but he couldn't find Jeffrey. However, if Susan's body was blocking the door, how did he discover it? Investigators believe that the Klungness family asked him not to come around anymore, which sent him into a rage and he beat Susan to death. He then most likely rushed Jeffrey back to the car before he could discover what he had done to his mother. He then most likely drove Jeffrey somewhere else and murdered him. The murder of his wife also occurred after he flew into a rage. While Marty has never been charged in connection with Susan's murder or Jeffrey's disappearance, he has continued to have run-ins with the law even as recent as 2019. He had also asked to take a neighbor's daughter to dinner with him, but they said no after Googling his name and learning about his past. The rejection pissed him off, and he threatened to eat their pet guinea pig. On the day Jeffrey went missing, he was wearing green pants and a green short-sleeved shirt. Sadly, as of August of 2024, Jeffrey has never been found, and both cases remain unsolved. In 2003, 25-year-old Kelvin McDuffie was living in Athens, Georgia. He was a student at the University of Georgia and was a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army Reserve. He was described as a very well-mannered individual with lots of ambitions. His ultimate dream was to marry his girlfriend and open his own restaurant in his hometown of Elberton, Georgia. Unfortunately, he would never get the chance. In May of 1994, when he was a teenager, his mother, Cora, was convicted of manslaughter after fatally shooting another female. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison and was released early in July of 2002. 6 months later, on January 15, 2003, Justin went to visit his grandmother in Elberton, Georgia. After leaving, his grandmother would never see him alive again. The following day, Kelvin's body was found next to his car on a remote access road off Olympic Drive in Athens, Clark County, Georgia. He had sadly been shot multiple times. Unfortunately, they've never identified a suspect in the case or released many details. If things weren't bad enough for the McDuffie family, 2 years later, another tragedy occurred. In November of 2004, his father, Chris, was working at the Pilgrim's Pride poultry plant and was also involved in a love triangle. It didn't help that the other man, Nathaniel Britton, worked at the same plant. The two men didn't like each other over their shared interest in a female coworker. So, by the beginning of November, tension had boiled to the point of no return. On Tuesday, the 2nd, Nathaniel walked into Chris's office and shot him 4 times. He then said to his coworkers, and I quote, "I'm not crazy, I'm not going to kill anyone else," and handed the magazine from the gun to another worker. When officers arrived, they pronounced Chris dead at the scene, and Nathaniel was taken into custody. Investigators have found no connection between his death and Kelvin's. However, some have wondered if Kelvin was murdered in a revenge plot for the woman Cora murdered. What do y'all think? Let me know in the comments below. It's now been over 20 years since Kelvin's murder, and as of August 2024, his case remains unsolved. Marjorie Lewis Dabney was born on November 26, 1931, and went by Margie. Margie was described as a very sweet woman who was known for her generosity. She was married and had 8 kids, but they divorced. She then met and married Joe Dabney Sr. in the 1960s, and he had 2 kids of his own. Sadly, in 2001, Margie was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and Joe was unable to look after her because he injured his hip in a bad traffic accident while working as a cab driver. Since their kids were grown and had jobs that prevented them from staying with her, family out in California invited her to come stay out there so they could help, and they agreed. Unfortunately, the trip out there would lead to a horrible tragedy. On December 5, 2001, at around 10 a.m., Joe and Margie landed at the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport from Indianapolis to catch their connecting flight. Margie would typically push Joe's wheelchair, but a wheelchair aide at the airport offered to help escort them from Gate 35 to Gate 39. However, the aide didn't realize that Margie had Alzheimer's, and he needed to keep up with the both of them. When the aide took Joe into the men's restroom, Margie also went to the restroom. When they came back out, they didn't see Margie and figured she was still inside. They waited for a little bit, but she never came out. The escort then found a female aide, and she went in and discovered that Margie was missing. She had sadly wandered off, and her family never saw her again. About 45 minutes after she went missing, airline workers notified the police. Joe was then pushed aboard their 3 p.m. flight to Los Angeles, crying the whole time because he didn't know where Margie was. Apparently, the airline called their family when Margie went missing, and they said it was okay to put him on the flight to LA. Regardless, they offered him a free flight back to Texas. Later that day, witnesses reported seeing Margie wandering around the tarmac, but the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport denies this. There were also sightings of her walking down a service road on the airport property a day or 2 later. The following day, ground and air searched the airport's 18,000 acres but found no sign of her. Over 5,000 flyers were also posted around Dallas, but once again, nothing. They also brought out tracker dogs and were able to follow her scent down the service road before it abruptly ended. They believe she got into a vehicle at that point. This wasn't the first time this occurred. Another time, she wandered away from a Greyhound station in Bakersfield, California, while Joe was using the restroom. She was finally located, but not before being missing for 3 days. In 2003, a $10 million lawsuit that Joe had filed against American Airlines was settled out of court. In the lawsuit, Joe claimed that the airline mistakenly labeled Margie as an unaccompanied minor instead of an Alzheimer's patient. He also claimed that his aide bullied him onto the flight. Margie would unfortunately remain missing for the next 7 years. 6 years after her initial disappearance, in 2007, the Army Corps of Engineers conducted a controlled burn in an area near Louisville Lake, located about 15 miles from the airport. That's when they discovered human remains just below the lake's dam. A year later, in 2008, the remains were identified as belonging to Margie. Then, in September of 2009, her clothes, ID card, bus pass, AARP card, and American Airlines tag were also discovered in the area. However, no one could understand how she ended up 15 miles away from the airport. That is until the medical examiner ruled her death a homicide. Dr. Mark Krause with the medical examiner's office determined that she had most likely been beaten to death due to the blunt force trauma to the skull. Unfortunately, it seems that after Margie wandered off and out of the airport, she encountered a horrible individual that took advantage of her before beating her to death. Many have wondered what, if anything, was caught on surveillance cameras, but the airport has refused to provide that information to the public. Margie stood 5 foot 2 inches tall, weighed 95 pounds, and was a diabetic with high blood pressure. She was wearing a dark 2-piece knit suit, a black faux leather jacket, and a rainbow scarf. She was carrying a beige purse and an Aldi shopping bag, but did not have money. The Louisville Police Department is still looking for anyone who might have seen her or her killer that day. Sadly, as of August of 2024, no arrests have been made, and this case remains unsolved. Kenneth Justin MacDonald was born in the early 1990s to parents Peggy and Ken and went by his middle name. Justin was described as a kind and reliable individual who could also be quite grumpy at times. He loved his pug and his family. He was especially devoted to his siblings who suffered from disabilities. In the summer of 2024, 34-year-old Justin was living in the small town of North Sydney in Nova Scotia when he suddenly vanished. On July 7th, Justin was seen at the Irving gas station around 11 p.m. After leaving, he was never seen again. His blue Kia Forte was later found about 15 miles away on Myra Road in the Ormond Crescent area. The area has been extensively searched, but no signs of him have been found. His mom has even been going out on a kayak looking for him, despite the fact that she's been recovering from a broken back. Justin is described as 5 feet 9 inches tall, 240 pounds, with sandy blonde hair and green eyes. Unfortunately, there are few details in the case, and as of August 2024, Justin remains missing.